let's get into the shows that we're talking about today. So, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about Real Housewives of New Jersey and The Valley. Which of these did you like the best?
I liked The Valley the best. And I think there's a couple of reasons, but I mean, I am more familiar with The Valley. I've watched the entire season, so I have some context. I still would say New Jersey is my favorite Housewives franchise, but I've fallen behind in the past couple of seasons. But I liked The Valley the best.
Awesome. Yeah, let's talk about The Valley. Can you start us off with a brief summary of what happened this episode from your perspective?
Yeah. So from my perspective, the group descended on Big Bear. And I think that the trip really revealed dynamics between each couple separately, even though they were there as a group. The men talk amongst themselves about relational hardships, while the women discuss the apparent turmoil between Jax and Brittany. And I really think it was like a couple's retreat without the therapy.
Yeah, totally. I want to dive into our artistic analysis because this was one of the best episodes for imagery and themes from my perspective of The Valley that we have seen so far. I'm curious if you guys felt the same way. Dylan, let's start with you. What stood out to you on this episode?
I definitely agree that the imagery was pretty strong in this one. Like it's getting to have like a pretty good like visual language. A couple things that stood out for me, just little details like after kind of most of the drama that night. I think one of the last things, if not the last things we see of that night, it is Janet and Jason like having a little conference with each other over like the outdoor like fire pit area, and I just kind of being like, oh man, did we like make a mistake having a kid? Because all these people who already have kids are just like in terrible relationships and hate each other. But the choice to have them like bundled up by the fire, but to have like very close-ups on their faces created like this kind of little intimate end cap to the scene that I thought it was a really good choice to use like close-ups in that moment with like a bit of firelight highlighting the faces. Another little detail I want to pick out, and I really want to talk about the discussion between the dudes on the boat because that was really good. But just a little visual detail, there's a great moment where Jesse is kind of interrogating Jax when they're sitting across from each other on the boat, and we get a little insert of Jax's hands like clenching and his fingers like picking at each other and stuff. And just to get that as like B-roll and then to choose to include it at that moment, that's the kind of thing that will really sell a moment's like psychology. I really like shots of hands being used to like sell a character's psychology instead of just relying on faces only. I think that's good like quality shot choices. There's a Japanese filmmaker I really like, who's Hirokazu Koreeda, if anybody knows him, but he's really good. And I saw him speak once, and he got a question from somebody that was like, why do you like always have shots of people's hands in your movies? And he was like, well, I just think that people show a lot of their personality through their hands. And, you know, it's a mistake to think that people only show personality through their faces. In some ways, we control our faces more, and what your hands are doing is more unguarded than what your face is doing. And I thought that was just a great observation. So great Koreeda-esque use of like a little hand shot there. Tiny detail, but I love those kind of things because it just adds like that much more depth and psychology into that moment right there.
Yeah, totally. Jenna, how about you? Did anything stand out in terms of how this was presented to you?
Yeah. So I think what stood out to me, was the way it was filmed. There were a lot of drone shots, which I thought was interesting. The house from the clouds, being able to see the house from the clouds, I think that spoke to kind of the power of the setting that they were in. Even as a group, when you look at that drone shot, it looks like very isolating. There aren't that many other houses around it. And it sets the scene that even though there's a group of people and everything is taking place in that house, which you can see through the drone shot, it's still, there's still like maybe a little like creepy feeling. It's kind of
totally.
like a horror movie, where you get that sense of isolation.
Yeah, like a slasher movie, and Zach is the slasher, apparently.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that they didn't totally lean into like a full blown, horror presentation, but there were, like you said, there's definite notes of horror to this idea that Zach is lurking in the woods. There's his post on a black background with the tag of being like somewhere nearby is like so menacing. And you've got a pregnant woman who is completely rattled by this, and everyone is isolated, and all their relationships are falling apart, and there's this specter of this this menace that could be lurking somewhere. I just really loved that dynamic and how it added to the tension in this episode. That's such a great call out.
Yeah, that really is a good observation. And I used to do a podcast about horror movies called Mind Over Splatter, where we talk about slasher movies a lot, and we talk about exactly that, which I find so fascinating, the way that these like park woodland areas at the like outskirts of civilization have such power as like the places where you go to find freedom and find who your real self is, and also confront the horror of life. And like just your feeling of uncertainty about what anything actually is outside of your social bubble. And so I really love this setting. This just, since we've been to Big Bear, it's been great. It's been like visually appealing TV, and the themes just seem that much deeper in that setting.
Totally. Yeah. In terms of what stood out to me for themes, I thought this episode was a really interesting exploration of the traditional gender roles and how these people and these couples are fitting into them, and like where they're struggling to meet certain expectations associated with these roles. There's discussion about how these roles have evolved, and there's this common theme about miscommunication between all of these people and their partners, and how the perspectives that they have inherited as a part, like from their societal gender roles, is kind of forcing their modes of communication to not align with their partners. I thought that was really interesting, and I thought that the use of fire within this episode was fantastic. I love, like you mentioned, Dylan, they used it in order to force a sense of intimacy between Janet and Jason. There's also the scene around the fire with the men gathered around the fire, and we're having that that conversation about how they fit and how they feel as like living up to the idea of what it means to be a man. And the use of fire as this like gathering point adds this like primitiveness to that conversation.
Sure, yeah.
And I just loved that association, and I love how that got carried through to the discussion on the boat that you mentioned, where they are so isolated. There's like nothing around them. It's men basically on an island talking about how they feel isolated and on an island. I just thought that it was just such great visual communication on this episode about really bad communication between spouses.
Yeah, totally. It's just such a great example of like their kind of masculinity, and it's really like it's funny to me. It's kind of sad too. Like just they're very defensive. They're sensitive, but they hate the idea of being called sensitive too. And they're like they rely on each other's like support so much, but also want to project self-sufficiency. And that kind of like brittle tension in their like conception of masculinity makes for like really energetic TV for me. Like it's just like really dynamic when you have moments like Danny starting to cry when he's obviously really drunk and saying, "I'm an effing alpha," was just like really funny, just really good. Like I kind of feel for the guy, and he's also just kind of being really ridiculous in that moment. And it's just we get a great study of like the way they see themselves in relation to this kind of like not very sustainable, contradictory idea of masculinity that they've made such an important part of their characters.
Totally. And Jason inviting them specifically so that he can get like boosted up to be like, am I going to be able to fulfill this new role and title that is so aligned with my masculinity? And you've got these guys who are like barely hanging on or like completely, trying so hard, like Danny is trying so hard to live up to this idea and just feeling so defeated in it. You've got like Jax Taylor, who is basically being like, I am going to redefine what this means so that I am fulfilling it in the most toxic way possible.
Yeah.
And that's like how I'm going to achieve this while still being, a completely terrible like partner and husband and man. We've got, Jesse, who's hanging on by a thread to his relationship and trying to like grasp with what that means for him and his ultra toxic idea of what it means to be a man and partner.
And all
truly,
of
truly amazing.
Yeah, and all of Jesse's advice is just like everything sucks, everything's terrible. And I love how Jesse even says like, I think you guys came to the wrong person for advice. And immediately Danny and Jax are both like, yeah, totally. You're such the wrong person. That's why we were not asking you. Nobody was asking you for advice, Jesse. You just started offering it.
And it really feels like they are in hell. You brought up you brought up like the fire imagery. And I think the name of the episode is Baby Moon from Hell, I believe. Which also reminds me that Bravo likes to use the term from hell to signify like an episode where there's going to be a lot of drama. Dinner party from hell. I think the dinner party in Amsterdam where Lisa Rinna smashes the glass, I think that's something from hell as well.
Yeah. Baby Moon from Hell sounds like an amazing like 90s anime show.
Exactly, where the babies talk in adult voices. But yeah, so I feel like you're talking about the men in particular kind of discussing amongst themselves the problems that they're going through, and it really feels like they're in the underworld. They're in Hades. They feel like they're trapped in their lives. And even though they're in this beautiful setting, there are fires everywhere.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk about quotes. What was your favorite quote from this episode?
I would say my favorite quote is Jesse saying, "They never do." When Danny is talking about being appreciated by his wife, by Nia. And he says, I do it all. It would be nice to be appreciated, and then Jesse says they never do. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting because again, the episode while they're all together was pretty siloed, the men and the women together. And yeah, I think that that kind of dynamic shows that the men really don't have a grasp on what the women have a grasp on, which is kind of like life and the daily duties that they have. And the men don't seem to grasp that really.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I love that it basically in the next breath after talking about how unappreciated he is as a result of his manhood. The next thing that he does is like shush Janet when she comes out just asking for some help, basically sends her back into the kitchen and like talks to her like she's a dog. And it's like, okay, well, I kind of see, someone else that is not being appreciated here in this scene. Certainly not you. Let's talk about strategic decisions that are made here in terms of the use of information or how social situations are navigated. Jenna, did anything stand out to you in terms of the gameplay here?
I would say I'm not sure if I have an opinion on the gameplay per se of the episode. I think that one of the strategies of the cast member that went very wrong, that goes wrong all the time, is Brittany and her drinking. I think that she came in to this episode with a strategy that she would do, quote unquote, light drinking to, I guess, be a part of the party atmosphere and be a part of the group. But that obviously goes very, very wrong for her. So that strategy of like maybe in her mind reining in the drinking, doing drinking an amount that is not excessive, that was a strategy that did not work for her.
Yeah, totally. Dylan, how about yourself?
Just how bizarre Zach's strategy is of making that Instagram post. That's so weird. What a weird thing to do, man. Like, what the hell?
Oh, God. I wrote down Zach is funny.
Yeah, I thought that this was hilarious. I thought what was
Kristen
most
appreciated
hilarious,
it.
Yeah, I think what was most hilarious about it was how like giddy they were and how they thought this was like this masterpiece of like shadiness that they had executed, and they were just like so happy. And it's totally not a big deal. It's just like this. You know, you shit post one story and you're thinking that this is a masterpiece, except they're right. It worked. It totally got to Janet. She didn't get any sleep. It's ruining her entire baby moon. So, you know, maybe maybe they're right.
It is kind of weird to be like, oh, you guys don't want to invite me? Huh? Well, maybe I should ruin your lives by implying that I might show up to your event. That'll make you want to invite me.
And that's such a that's also such a Doute thing to do. Doute is always kind of like, I mean, it's a thing. She's not invited to things in all of the shows that she is a part of. And it's like, there's always that looming specter of Doute. Like, she wasn't invited because she's crazy, but she's still crazy behind the scenes, like stirring some drama up to get back at you.
Yeah, totally. I think the main piece of like strategy that stood out to me this episode was how Jax is handling this information with Michelle. You know, this has been a football that he's been like carrying. He's passed it a few times to people, trying to get them to, you know, execute a play on his behalf. Carry it up the field
for him. Yeah,
and finally he's like, I just have to run this myself. And so he sits down with Michelle and they have their conversation. It's like, whatever. He's finally like got this out there. And then he's like, so should we go and talk to Jesse, or are you're going to take care of it? And she's like, no, I'm going to take care of it. And then he's like, should we go together? Like, he's like really trying to make this happen finally. And then she's like, no, I got it. She goes upstairs, and I love that immediately she starts talking to Jesse, and, you know, being the completely shitty partner that he is, he doesn't want to listen to his wife or take her word for it. He immediately calls down to Jax to get him to come up. And it's just like, I don't want to play telephone with, you know, this nobody, his wife. I don't want to have to rely on her information.
I don't want to have to hear some random person's interpretation of events gesturing towards his wife.
When Jesse screamed for Jax, he was like, Jax! Instead of listening to Michelle, it made me think of The Office with Joy saying, Michael, just kind of like to get him in the room. He doesn't want to listen to Michelle. He wants to go straight to the top.
Yeah. Yeah. Really funny too, how he doesn't like walk out of the room and like call it out to him over the staircase, just remains sitting, just starts hollering his name. And the Jax is so disappointed that Jesse's not more upset. You know, he wants to start a scene. He wants them to blow up at each other. And he's so frustrated when Jesse's just like, whatever, who cares? That's how real estate works or something. I'm also really, I don't know. I guess I'm running the business. I'm really invested in a seesaw though, over like whether Michelle actually did anything or not, because it's been such like, it feels like it really changes from one episode to the next, the read on it, like whether she she actually did anything that's cheating or not. Like at first it was like, oh, she's had a relationship with another guy for a year. And then it's like, oh, she was texting a guy. And then it's like, oh, but she was sexting a guy. Oh, but she was sending pictures of herself wearing a dress to a guy. It's like, we need to go back and forth a few more times, I think, before we can start to figure out whether she actually did something wrong or not.
Yeah, I wrote down Michelle is lying, but it's okay.
Yeah, probably.
I think that Jesse is not the greatest partner. He's kind of a buffoon, and so I'm like, you know what, Michelle, if you wanna text somebody, I think remind me, are they in real life currently separated?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what
it's probably for the best.
I would hope so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's get into our highlights. Jenna, we'll start with you. What do you want to talk about from this episode?
Let's see here. So I think, well, one of the big things, going back to like the imagery and artistic themes throughout, we talked a little bit about it being a horror movie, just taking it back to kind of like the horror of it all. It was really, for me, reminiscent of The Shining. There is that isolating mountain house, and there's also somebody battling with alcoholism, in my opinion. So it is the setting that is creepy, and there's somebody like really battling with demons. I think they're all sort of battling with demons, but the alcohol really strikes a nerve with me. And I mean, I drink alcohol on an occasion, but there's something really dark about Brittany's situation to me that, and I like try to refrain from being judgmental, but there's this like darkness that comes with her drinking when she's saying, I'm not drunk, it's only one shot. It's like, well, if you know that one shot is going to do this to your body, like, what are you struggling with? Is it Jax making you drink this much? What is holding you on to that, like, one or two shots? So the theme of like alcohol in there and like an isolated place and things are brewing and it can come to a head and there can be a very scary ending. That's kind of one of the things that came to mind for me as well.
Totally. I think one of the things that they've done really well with the presentation of this trip is they did not really show us how much Brittany had to drink on that boat ride. Yeah. So it leaves the question up to the viewer to interpret what we're getting from everyone in the same way that Jax has to do. Is Brittany drunk or is she just sick? And I think that is done intentionally because that's really not the like most important question about this whole situation, or that's not the most important information. Like there's so much information that we're getting just from the way that they talk to each other about alcohol and her past, like getting sick, that whether or not she had, too many shots today is not the important issue. The thing is that, this is a pattern. They have developed ways of talking about this, like how Brittany relates to alcohol, how she relates to Jax about alcohol, just all of their conversations and the pattern that we have been seeing about this. This does not seem like something that is done just for the show. These do not sound like people that have only just started talking about alcohol as a problem in their relationship. They have, the vocabulary to talk about this. It's a very established vocabulary surrounding alcohol in their relationship. So whether or not she actually, is drunk right now is not actually what's important in their relationship. It's that this is a pattern.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Dylan, how about you? What do you have for highlights?
Other than what we've already mentioned, I do like getting a little bit more of Jason in there. I'm starting to like him more and more. Like him being the straight-laced dweeb of the group. We got a great reference to that when he says something like, "Oh, I haven't even talked to a woman who's not my wife in 4 years," and Jasmine's like, "Oh, somebody's looking to get vanilla missionary sex tonight." Really good stuff from her. Good line. But also, like, when we have him on the boat, we finally get like his lawyery side coming out. I think we've often had characters be like, "Oh, lawyer over here, lawyer alert. He's going to phrase this for me. He's going to find the right words because he's a lawyer." But we've never really kind of seen that side from before. On the boat, we do actually finally get that from him when he's like correcting Danny about his misuse of the term Napoleon complex, which I can relate. You don't need to correct him on that. You understand what he's saying. But when somebody's misusing a common expression, you kind of got to get in there. And he was right. He was like, Jason was right. Daddy was misusing the expression. And him like just kind of analyzing what Jax is saying and just kind of like calling attention to things, like he's cross-examining him, being like, "Oh, you just said, like, you just implied that loving your wife and getting divorced from your wife are mutually exclusive things. They are not." Or being like, "Oh, you just said two in that sentence, implying that you also have a bad relationship." Like the way he's like seizing on specific things that are being said in a lawyerly way was a nice contribution to that like really tension-filled and dynamic scene. So I'm like that we're seeing a little bit more of Jason's dorky personality coming out. I want to see some more of that.
Yeah, I was wondering how he was going to like factor into this, and definitely his role within that scene and how he like played into it was the perfect use of his personality there. Because like you said, just being so hung up on the semantics and like dissecting everything, it really added a lot to the scene. Totally.
Yeah.
I think that we covered most of what I wanted to talk about with this. Let's get into our stars then. Jenna, who are your stars from this episode?
Let's see here. I think that some of my stars, I mean, we talked about this briefly. He was in the episode the least, but made a funny impact. Zach, with his tagging Big Bear, this small in the black screen. I thought that was a star for me. I also really liked Jax wearing, and this has happened in the previous episodes, his own merch. I think that always stands out to me. Yeah. The number one guy in the group sweatshirt he was wearing, Janet made him that Drowning in Big Bear Lake t-shirt he was wearing the other episode. Brittany, I've seen her wearing her own merch. I don't know if it was Rotten Hell merch or, she was wearing a t-shirt of the art that Jax got for his birthday roast. Right. So that just stands out to me whenever, and it happens on, it's happened before in the Bravo universe where the Bravolebrity wears their own merch on TV. And I always think that's super interesting because it like sort of breaks the fourth wall, but also kind of displays their hubris a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. Speaking of what Brittany was wearing, I love that we saw her in this like California sweater, like big like California branded sweater. It just reminded me of like the tourist vibes that we got from Brock in San Francisco during the finale for Vanderpump Rules. And it's so like, it is so Brittany. I remember on old episodes of Vanderpump Rules when she like first moved to LA and moved in with Jax, all over their apartment, it had like, signs for the beach and stuff like that. And it's like, they don't live anywhere close to the beach, but they still have like a beach theme in their apartment. Really touristy. And I love how lame Brittany is in that way.
And then there's also when she first gets onto the scene in season 4, I think one of her first scenes is she's wearing this big pink sweatshirt that says Kentucky across it. She's repping Kentucky. And so it's interesting now she's wearing a a big California t-shirt.
Yeah.
It says a lot about her journey.
Yeah, totally. She's literally wearing signposts on
Yeah.
her journey.
From here to here.
Dylan, what are your stars here?
Let's give a first star to Danny, because I kind of feel like he was the heart of that whole like study of awkward masculinity. He was kind of pathetic, but kind of heartbreaking and kind of funny, and it was an interesting showing from him. Second star to Jason for the reasons I just said, and let's give a third star to Janet for making some good burgers and then blowing up on Jesse. That was that's good work from her too.
Yeah, totally. I think those are good picks. I liked what we got from Danny, this drunk, emotional, insecure guy. I really enjoyed that. We saw a lot more from Jason, so that's my pick. And I again have to give it to Jax just by being the villain that we know he is, and being his honest, true Jax self. One thing that I forgot to mention that I just wanted to highlight, though, was Kristen's spa day. I really love how little effort she went in putting this together. like the cheapest foot bath things that you could find on Amazon, fresh out of the box.
Totally, like Chinatown $15 foot massage things. Yeah.
And I love how Doute's just... Oh God, I was going to say Doute's like being relegated to secondary scenes, and like the best she gets is a foot bath.
Yeah, totally. They couldn't find a sponsor for an actual spa where they could have this conversation, so they just ordered some stuff on Amazon Prime and did it.